What is going on, everybody, and welcome to episode 5 of the Everyday Sens podcast. I am Jack Richardson alongside Brennan Parks. And Brennan, once again, I keep saying this every episode, and I'm going to keep reiterating that it's constant news in the off season for the Ottawa Senators. We've got ownership stuff, we have signings, and we have coaches being fired around the league that we are potentially interested in. So, how are you doing on this Monday, May 8th?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. It feels like every day we're getting a new celebrity here. The Sens are the hottest commodity around the sports world right now. So it's definitely different than what we were expecting even a few months ago. And yeah, excited to dive into it.
Everyone wants a piece of the Ottawa Senators, and you mentioned the celebrities, and we talked last episode about Snoop Dogg joining the Nico Sparks bid, but now the Weeknd, obviously an R&B singer from Toronto. He's I would say, I mean, we're not a music podcast. We're not trying to judge a bunch of music, but I'd say he's one of the most well known with this generation. I think Snoop Dogg's a bit different because he's a bit more the older generation, and now it's more his persona versus his music being popular. But I'd say now the Weeknd is pretty much in his prime for making music, and he's joined up with the Kimmel family out of Toronto, who I believe it's two brothers who are leading that bid. So all this to say is that there are now three different bids with three different A-list celebrities joining them and trying to get a piece of the Ottawa Senators and trying to own them. So what do you make of this one? I feel like it's just going to be the same things. We don't know as much about this bid as we do about Snoop Dogg. I'm sure we might find out in the coming days, but what were your initial reactions? I remember I know I was golfing and I saw your tweet just about it. It was the first one for the news that I saw, and I told my friends, I'm like, this is crazy. Like, I don't know what world we're living in here that every celebrity wants a piece of the Ottawa Senators.
Yeah, it is. It's almost an alternate universe type situation. But the Weeknd, yeah, I think he set a bunch of records recently for music and albums, and I don't know, he's done a bunch of stuff. He was at the Super Bowl halftime show, and that's become such a popular GIF, right, to use on Twitter. Um, he is super well known, and you're right about being this generation too. I think Snoop Dogg, everybody knows Snoop Dogg, but he does definitely cater to that '90s generation a little more, right? Um, the Weeknd, man, I mean, he was rumored a long time ago. Back in November, I think there were rumors, nothing confirmed, but like his name came up. I think maybe even before Reynolds or around the same time as Reynolds, because he has ties to Canada. Obviously, he was born in Toronto and Ottawa as well. I think it's his producer or his assistant or something. Somebody is from Ottawa and went to like Maryvale High School and is super close ties to Ottawa. So he definitely has ties there. And yeah, the Kimmel family is interesting too because they held a stake in the Pittsburgh Penguins until they were sold in I think 2021. So they have been involved with the hockey world, and they also invest in the entertainment business pretty heavily apparently. So that group is definitely interesting. I don't know if we're gonna get an interview with the Weeknd or what's going on, but I think he's kind of got it now that Snoop did, right? We don't know a lot, like you said. What I keep coming back to about these guys compared to Reynolds, because Reynolds is kind of like he's been at the forefront for a while, is what stake they hold. Because as much as it's good to have the name connected to the franchise, like if you look at Marshawn Lynch or Macklemore in Seattle, they both, and at first it was exciting, and they both, they're connected to the franchise. They hold like a very small percentage, but like I haven't heard either of their names since that initial launch, right? I don't know, maybe that's just me, but I haven't heard a thing about them since then. Maybe they appear at a few games a year, but to me, like I want the owner and the celebrity, if there's an option to have him involved in really marketing the team like throughout the season, I'd rather that than holding like a 5% stake and not really doing much.
Yeah, and I think that's probably why a lot of people want Reynolds over these other two celebrities, right? And it's because he obviously has experience with Wrexham, but it's not just that experience and how successful it's been; it's how hands-on he's been with that process, and him and Rob McElhenney as well. I'm not sure if McElhenney would be involved if Reynolds is an owner of the team. I'm sure he would in some capacity, but I'm a big fan of the show, the Always Sunny in Philadelphia. It's probably anyway. I think you're right. I think the Weekend to me, at least now, initially feels more like a Macklemore and a Marshawn Lynch, like a just a name. And listen, that'll take them far, and that's I'm not complaining at all. But when it's a bidding war against other celebrities, you got to show us what you're bringing to the table, you know. And when I say us, I mean the Melnick estate and selling the team because it's up to them, right? At the end of the day, we don't. It's fun to discuss who we like more and who should be where, or whatever. But we don't get to decide. It's whoever has the deepest pocket, essentially, right? And again, though, that comes back to Reynolds, and the Remington and Reynolds group have reportedly submitted a $1 billion bid. So I'm not sure if adding Snoop Dogg and adding the Weeknd to these other groups are going to get that bid up to $1 billion. I mean, I'm sure it can, but that's what matters. And you're right. I think knowing what the stake is really interesting to me too. Like, I don't even know what Reynolds' stake is, right? It could be 5% for all we know. And not that that's nothing, but it's just, I think this is my lack of business experience, but I'm pretty sure that if you're Ryan Reynolds and you have only a 5% stake in the team, you're not going to have a ton of say in what happens, right? So I would imagine that that's very important. So maybe it'll come out for the group that wins it. I don't know if it'll come out for the losing groups. Like, oh yeah, Snoop Dogg was 75% of an owner, right?
Yeah, and on Reynolds, so I think we saw, and I can't remember where it came from. I can't source it, but I'm pretty sure it said. I mean, I think he said himself that he wanted to be like very involved. That's kind of where I'm taking that from. And he didn't say a stake, like he didn't say he's going to have a certain percentage. But I know that it might have been in Bruce Garriock's article, one of his articles, that their plan, and because the Remington Group met with Reynolds before he picked them, their plan was, and they laid this all out for him, was to be like they'd work on behind the scenes, they'd work on developing the new land, they'd kind of work on the hockey, like the money side of things, whereas Reynolds would kind of be the face of the franchise and really like marketing the team. And like he said, he wanted to, I said that thing the other podcast there about him saying Wrexham is 50 half of me, and I'd like this to be the other 50 half of me, and how he spends his time, right? So I don't know. I just think, and you look at Wrexham again because it's really, it's an example of what he can do. And I think, no, he's not going to be making hockey decisions. Like, he's not going to be, and I think a lot of people have that concern of he's going to come in and he's going to be one of those owners who's in the room and he's like, oh no, we're not trading this guy, I like this guy. And he's kind of directing the GM. I think in one of Garriock's articles, he said too that like he's not going to be doing that. And he didn't do that in Wrexham necessarily either. He's not going to be the general manager, but he is going to be around the players. He is going to be doing things. And with Snoop too, I remember in Ian's article at The Athletic, he said Snoop would maybe be around for like 6 games a year. And to me, that's a very small stake and a very small percentage. And I know that was almost built up to be, it sounded like Snoop was almost like, yeah, I'll be there for 6 games a year. And that's going to be awesome. Those are going to be 6, but there's 82 games in a year. So I'd rather someone who's going to be around for even 20 or 30 games, right? And really, not just like, not involved with the hockey stuff, but around the team and really marketing the team as much as possible. And from what we've heard, it sounds like Reynolds will do that. Of course, we don't know. Maybe the Weeknd, maybe Snoop would do that as well, even more than we think. But from what we know right now, it feels like Reynolds and Remington are still the front runner.
It does seem that way, yeah. And it's, I think what the Snoop Dogg quote there from Ian's article at The Athletic was I'll come to 6 games, and if we make playoffs, I'll come to 10 or something like that. And it's just like, okay, but listen, all this does now, and until, I mean, I guess it's about a week now until bids are officially due, and I don't know the timeline after that, but this is certainly not a coincidence that these 2 other celebrities have joined in. I don't know if it's late, but I'd imagine it's been recently and not, when Reynolds was doing it, because I think this has just been a bit of a marketing campaign a little bit for these other groups, and it's working because huge sports news outlets are talking about this in the United States about the Ottawa Senators. And like, listen, the Ottawa Senators logo was on First Take on last Monday. That doesn't happen. They were the lead show. It was part of their Monday, weekend headlines. It was the Ottawa Senators. Like, that's incredible. So the fact that we're talking about the Ottawa Senators in May on national headlines all the time, and they're not even in the playoffs, is a bonus for me in this process. Like, I think the new ownership in general is going to be great, but the process has been awesome because it's been so much exposure for the team.
Yeah, that's true. Like, even, I mean, 2 of these parties aren't going to win, right? And even still, they're advertising for the team one heck of a lot. So, I mean, I think it's just put Ottawa on the map for a lot of people, especially in the States, right? Because these have been primarily American headlines that we're seeing too. And I think, a lot of people, if you told them before this, like you said Ottawa, they'd be questioning what that is. And now I think they probably recognize it a lot more. And Snoop posting on social media too, right? I am curious as to like whichever party wins. I do wonder if they try to bring the other ones in as investors, because for Snoop and the Weeknd, I mean, if they really want to be in on it, and Snoop seems like he's pretty, like he's really spoken out about it and said that he wants to do it, and even if it's just the 6 games or whatever, he doesn't have to be the face of the franchise necessarily. But if Reynolds wins, could he then collaborate and say, okay, Snoop, do you want to come into like that Macklemore role or that Marshawn Lynch role where you have a small stake and you can come to a few games and we can work on the entertainment side together, and you can maybe perform in Ottawa, whatever it is. I mean, why wouldn't you try and do that, right? If you're Reynolds, that's going to bring in so much more exposure. So I am curious to see if these could kind of partner at the end of the day, because I don't think there's any like contract tying them to a specific group. I think they do have the flexibility to change if they really want to. And we've seen that too. Bettman said that about Reynolds, was even if Remington doesn't win, they'd still like to get him involved somehow. So I don't think that we've kind of just seen these three specific groups. I think maybe we could see something more when the sale actually happens.
Yeah, and just to kind of wrap up, and obviously the Weeknd himself is kind of the headline for this specific segment. But what's exciting about him and even Snoop Dogg is that they're entertainers, right? Reynolds is just an actor, and obviously the name carries weight. But I would say with artists like that, this isn't just a bid for the Ottawa Senators; it's a bid for the Canadian Tire Center as well. Like you're owning the building. As a younger person in the city, like thinking about the potential concerts that could be run because the Weeknd or because Snoop Dogg owns the building, that's exciting to me. Like I know that Ottawa gets this little brother syndrome kind of vibe between Montreal and Toronto, but it's true because a lot of big stars when they do their tours throughout North America and throughout Canada, they skip Ottawa. They go from Toronto to Montreal, and it's just a fact. Like I don't believe Drake has been to Ottawa since 2010 or something like that. Like, and that's not, you know, I don't know if that would change necessarily if the Weeknd is or the Snoop Dogg is owning the Canadian Tire Center, but it's a factor. And it's not just about the hockey, it's about the global brand of the Ottawa Senators that they all keep talking about. So very exciting stuff in Ottawa. And again, I'm going to say this again. I think by the time we record next, there's going to be another headline about this ownership thing, which is exciting. But for right now, let's move to some on ice stuff. And I can't wait to finally hear about this guy so I know how to properly pronounce his name. We're going to go Jiri Smejkal. That's how I believe it's pronounced. Has signed for $875,000 on a 1-year entry-level deal with the Ottawa Senators. He played over in the SHL and was pretty effective. Nothing eye-popping in terms of stats. But Brennan, I know that as we're recording right now, he's playing in a pre-tournament game for the Czech over at the Worlds. And I know you've been kind of following along. So what's your initial takes on I mean, maybe what were your initial takes on the signing, just the timing and everything like that, and then maybe what you think of the player?
Yeah, I was surprised by the timing of it. I mean, I think with the ownership headlines taking over here, you're kind of figuring because Pierre's been involved with those groups and kind of doing meetings and stuff, and you kind of think he's probably sitting there thinking about his own job and job security and wondering what's going to happen to him this summer. So I didn't expect him to be scouting over European players and signing them now, but maybe they just got some info from their scouts or whatever it was, or their assistant GMs, right? And they wanted this guy for a while. But yeah, the timing of it was a little weird. I like the player a lot though, and I'm surprised by some things I've seen on Twitter where people are pretty much writing him off. Like it's so strange to me because he's coming over, and although no, it wasn't too eye popping with the stats. The SHL and the Liga too, which are Sweden and Finland's top men's leagues. He's played there the last 2 years, and they're not easy leagues. People think these are easy leagues because they're not the NHL or they're not North American, but they're widely considered the third and fourth most difficult leagues, like even higher than the AHL in terms of how difficult it is, and they're especially good defensively too. Like there was only 3 players, I think, in Sweden last year that were over a point per game, or maybe that was in Finland that were over a point per game. Like there's only usually a few players over a point per game, and he did it in Finland in 2021-22. He put 46 points up in 45 games, and then last year he was 43 points in 49 games, I think, in Sweden, and he wasn't on like the best team in the league either, right? Like he did a very good job. I think the interesting thing about his stats is that he kind of came out of nowhere because before the last 2 seasons, he hadn't produced a whole lot, and I wrote an article, free to read, on everydaysens.com about him, just breaking down the player, the fit, and everything you need to know about him, so go check that out. A little plug, but But yeah, I don't know. I mean, he kind of came out of nowhere. He never produced in the WHL, so he has played in Canada before. He played in the Western Hockey League in junior, but he didn't really score a whole lot, didn't get drafted. Went to Czechia for 4 years, played in their pro league, didn't produce a whole lot. Probably just served a depth role, right? Like he's solid defensively. And then the last 2 years in harder leagues, he really broke out. And maybe that's just him hitting his prime. Maybe it was a better situation, whatever it was. I think he's been shooting a lot more. I think what I read too from scouts was that he needed to be more physical, because he's massive, and I tweeted this when I was watching the Czechia game this morning. He is huge. Like, he just looks massive on the ice compared to other people. He stands very tall, and he's very built, and he's strong on his skates. But I read that one of the things holding him back from the NHL was his physicality, despite his size, which is a common issue, right, for big players, is they don't often know how to use their size. I think the last couple of years he's really come into that size, and it's helped him be more of a net front presence. On the power play for Czechia, he was in the front of the net just causing havoc. So yeah, he does a lot of things. He's got versatility, and I think he's a good bottom six option. I think he's someone who could step in on the fourth line and be an upgrade.
Yeah, that's exciting, right? And I was pulling up Pierre Dorion's statement or his quote from the press release that they signed him, and I'll just read it out here. Jiri is a good addition for us. It improves our depth and provides us with an additional bottom six option at forward. He's a big body who's strong with previous experience playing in North America, which should help us transition to a rink with smaller dimensions. We're pleased that he's committed to the Senators. So to me, like I like that part because it kind of suggests like they scouted him being like he's a big player, and like you mentioned, he's filled out for a tall guy too, like not just tall and rangy. He's built. Um, but it's exciting because over in Europe the rinks are much larger. It's a different game. It's speed, skill. So saying they want him to play more physical, it'll be much easier to do that, I guess, on a smaller rink, and a bigger body will have more success likely on a smaller arena. So it's exciting that they're analyzing that as a reason to kind of bring this player in. I saw some discussion though about this isn't the bottom six help the Sens need, and I don't agree with that at all because listen, you can say we need NHL proven depth in our third and fourth lines. They can't afford it. Like they can't afford to sign a guy or two guys for $2 million, right? If you're working on signing Alex DeBrincat to a big extension, like getting a guy, and I mentioned this on Twitter, and I know we've talked about it before, is getting a guy for 875, and I've got the cap hit in front of you if you're watching on the YouTube. It's important because like an entry level deal, Ridley Gregg I think makes 925, right? I think that's his entry level contract. That's a lot of savings. That's $50,000 in savings. You do that, that adds up. That's nuts. And when we're talking about a DeBrincat extension, when we're humming and hawing over 8.3 or 8.4 or 8.5, that's the 0.4 and that's the 0.5. That's the extra 100K you can afford to pay. So it's not. I don't know. I feel like some people are probably caught up on the internal cap and the internal budget days. And I know that it's hard to kind of maybe fathom that they're long gone, but this was a cap team last year. They're going to be a cap team this year. You need to save everywhere you can. So I don't hate bringing in a guy like this versus, I don't know, finding a depth option who just had a good playoff run, who's probably going to have an inflated cap hit because of what he did in the playoffs. You know what I mean? Like, I know that, we'll get to the Rangers in a second here, but I know that Barclay Goodrow, I don't know what he makes, like something crazy for being a bottom six forward. But I know he's probably going to be on the market this summer because the Rangers are looking to shake things up. And like, that's not a guy I don't want to target that kind of player. I want to target these guys who are not high risk but have high reward.
Yeah, I was just about to say that the low risk, high reward is exactly what you're looking for. Because at worst, you're signing this guy, and he's on a two-way deal, by the way. He's not on a one-way deal, which is another thing that an NHL player, if you signed him, would probably be on. So you'd be strapped to him in the NHL. If he doesn't work out, you can send him to Belleville. Like he's on an entry-level deal at 26 years old. And back to that, like what they're saying is the adjustment period will not be necessary. Typically, if you sign a guy out of Europe and he's never played in Canada and he's only used to that big ice, there's going to be an adjustment period. He's already played on that small ice in Canada for a few years, so there shouldn't be much of an adjustment period, and his game fits the smaller ice really well. But yeah, the low risk, high reward is what you want because you can send him to Belleville and save that money anyways, for one. And for two, it's a 1 year deal. So you've signed him, you haven't signed him to a 2, 3, 4 year deal like some of these other depth guys are getting. At worst, he leaves next summer and that's it, right? You're done. And it's not, 875 is not a lot. And they had a little signing bonus on there too, but that doesn't count against the cap. I mean, people have been talking about him, and I'm saying him because I don't know how to pronounce his name either. People have been talking about him for a while now in as a free agent option out of Europe, and there's these European guys every summer and every year that kind of stand out, Zoo being one of the most notable in recent years. A lot of the time they don't work out, right? But at the same time, teams don't usually sign them to mega deals where it's going to be affecting them long term, right? You might as well take a shot, and honestly, I mean, I see him as kind of an upgrade on Austin Watson. And we don't know how he's going to be in the NHL because he's never been there. But I mean, if he can score more than 10 points, he's essentially an upgrade on Austin Watson, and he's scored a point per game or higher in basically each of the last 2 years in some of the most difficult leagues in the world. So yeah, I'm excited to see him play. I'm gonna keep watching him and check. Yeah, I'll keep updating on everydaysens.com. Keep probably write another article or something on his game, but maybe I'm getting a little too worked up about a depth guy who might not even make the team. But this is what we do in the summer, right? Like, it's exciting.
Exactly. Yeah, they're feeding us this signing, right? And just the last thing, I pulled up the Sens Cap Friendly and just looking at their non-roster. So everyone who's signed to an entry level deal that was in the AHL or in junior or wherever they were, right? So Tyler Boucher is the highest pay. Boucher, Yarventi, and actually just those two have an 894 cap hit, right? So no one's in the 925s that's not on the roster already. Ridley Gregg 863, Zach Ostapchuk 847, Crookshank 838, Lodine's 830, Philip Daoust is another underrated prospect, I think, 821. Igor Sokolov 818, that's a big one. Like all these guys, and I'm just looking through the list here, and actually I got it wrong there. Smejkal is at 870, not 875, so we're saving an extra 5,000 that we didn't know we were saving. But all this to say is that those players are going to push. All those guys I named are going to push for spots in the bottom six, and it's good. It's a good problem to have. I think people think that signing, I know Igor Sokolov probably needs a deal, I think, this summer, but signing these guys to new contracts and everything, if they're that low, just give them this, right? Like, I'm going to give the management in the NHL some credit here. They have to think about every single last dollar that they're dishing out in the salary cap world. It's crazy. Like every point, every little play that these players make has to be microanalyzed. And it's interesting to think about because I think adding a guy with that kind of cap hit, right? Not pushing the 950, not pushing the 925, is very important. So tidy work from Pierre Dorion.
Before we wrap up on that point too, like I just want to add to that just because I think it's so important. Like you said, those contracts are so important to the cap, right? And that's why it's pivotal that you draft well, because moving forward, even as a contending team, you have to draft well and you have to have guys on entry level deals. Because if you look at contenders, a lot of them have these bottom six guys or bottom pairing defensemen are on entry level, just cheap deals. And you need that because there's going to be a rotation. When you're a cap team, you have to keep rotating players in and out. And you have to have the cheap guys available. And a lot of the time, you can't find them in free agency. It's a lot easier said than done to go sign a legitimate third or fourth liner for $1 million. Like most of them, even Tyler Mott costs you almost 1.5. Like it's easier said than done, and that's why drafting is so important. That's why the amateur scouting has done a really good job for the Sens. But yeah, those guys you named are gonna they're gonna be the ones who allow you to sign Alex DeBrincat or Jake Sanderson to a big deal. That is exactly what you need. If you get strapped to the Barclay Goodrows and players like that, you're gonna suffer a little bit more with signing big contracts, right? So yeah, we can move on from that point. I just wanted to add that in.
No, it's completely fair. And hey, we're never going to shun away from talking an extended amount of time about a depth signing because this guy could be the player who scores the Stanley Cup winning goal for the Ottawa Senators. You never know. All right, so let's move on. I mentioned we were going to talk about the Rangers a little bit. Gerard Gallant, after 2 seasons in the Big Apple, he's gone. This is a guy who I think has had very good results everywhere he's been, but has been fired very quickly everywhere he's been. I think he's coached for 4 teams, but 3 in the last 7 years or something like that. Like he's been everywhere. He was in Vegas, he was in Florida, and obviously recently in the Big Apple, and he was fired after they were eliminated from the New Jersey Devils in 7 games. I tweeted out that I liked him, and I understand the baggage, I guess, necessary. Like I don't know if it's baggage, but it's just the track record speaks for itself. Yeah, he gets results, but clearly players get unhappy with him pretty quickly, and management too. So I don't know where your head's at on this, but I'd be all for it, and I'll kind of explain after. But where's your head on Gerard Gallant?
He's an interesting one. We brought him up in the first members podcast where we spent a lot of time breaking down different coaches and Gallant, Julian, Brunette. There was a bunch of them. But anyways, Gallant is an interesting one because I initially really liked him, and I'm not going to say I don't now. I think he brings some good qualities, and I think like Ottawa needs a coach, I think, that can actually that's done stuff before. I know we talk about the recycled coaches and how you want to find new blood and everything, but they did that with DJ, and a lot of the new blood, it doesn't work out because they don't have any experience pushing a team to that next level. And Ottawa's at the point where they need to reach that next level. So to me, you do need a veteran coach. Now, Gallant has been fired. Yeah, he's coached 4 teams. Columbus was first back in 2003, but he's never made it past his 3rd season. So New York just fired him at the end of his 2nd season. And then Florida and Vegas recently fired him during his 3rd season, like right at the beginning. He actually had a positive record in both of those years. So I don't know why he got fired exactly. I haven't looked at it, but I'm assuming he just wasn't meeting their standards, right? Like again, teams set standards, and this is where I come back to Ottawa is different than other teams and why it's kind of frustrating with DJ is because teams set strict standards. And if the coach is even slightly missing those standards, they're out of there most of the time, even if it's a good coach like Gallant. So he's coached, he was coach of Team Canada too at the World Championship in the year where Nick Paul, I think, scored the golden goal. DJ was an assistant to him there. But I mean, I like him. It is certainly a red flag that he keeps getting fired. I don't know what that's about. And I mean, I've seen, again, haven't dove into it, but I've seen apparently he talked about how coaches don't actually have systems and stuff, and it's just a little concerning. And apparently he's not overly great with the prospects or young guys either. So I don't know. Probably not my first choice, but certainly someone I would be up for an interview and kind of see what his plan is.
Yeah, so my thinking on this is that I think during this whole DJ Smith tenure, we've all been very, happy with the way he's handled the young guys. I think in general, maybe Brandstrom's the only one where it's been a little iffy, but I think everyone else, Sanderson came right in and like was essentially handed the wheel. Stützle, Norris, Batherson, like all these guys came into the league under DJ Smith and thrived for what it's worth. So anyway, I think where they're at now in their rebuild, I don't care about that anymore. I mentioned that I want Gallant yesterday on Twitter, and I got some replies being like, "Oh, what about Pinto and Greg and all this?" And look, obviously, I care about their development, and their development's important for the Sens. But I don't care anymore. Like it's about winning. It has to be about winning. And I said a couple episodes ago, me myself, and I know you will too. Like we're gonna push the agenda that they need to be a playoff team in 2024. End of discussion. I think hiring a coach like this gets you in the playoffs next year. End of discussion. So I guess my feeling is obviously I don't want to say that I don't care about the development of the prospects, but when DJ has been here, that's been at the forefront. And DJ even said it himself in his exit interview. He was like, the goal here for me, because he was very vague about his future, was to develop the young guys and to develop the prospects. And he did that, and he succeeded in that goal. But now the goal has to be to compete. And to compete, I think a guy like this will do that. Now, I don't even know if, how he would work with a Tim Stützle, because another thing was like, yeah, Tim's young. And I think a lot of focus on Gallant in New York was about Lafreniere and Kako. I think those two guys kind of haven't met their potential yet, right? And I think Lafreniere especially. I think Kako had a decent season, but Lafreniere has been disappointing for the Rangers. And I think that having Stützle, who's already stepped into his own and is a stud in the league, I think it's perfect because it's not like Gallant's going to step in and be like, yeah, you got to earn your ice time. Timmy's the top player on the team. So you got to come in and look at him like that and not look at him as a rookie who hasn't stepped in yet. So that's why I'm kind of okay with the idea of hiring a coach like this. Like you can't have it both ways. You can't have a guy who's going to coddle the young players and, give them all the ice time and let them figure it out, and have a guy who's going to hold people accountable and push for the playoffs, because it doesn't work that way. It doesn't it doesn't, I guess they can't coexist, those two philosophies in the NHL. So I think it's time to shift philosophies in Ottawa and just go hard. Get me Gallant, even if it's going to be a 2-year stint, because excuse me, that's what he happens to do all the time. I'm okay with hiring a guy like that.
Yeah, I agree with those points, and I definitely agree with the point about the young players, because a lot of people, that seems to be their main concern with Gallant, is that he doesn't cater to young players, and he doesn't focus on development a whole lot. Now, like you said, though, Ottawa isn't really, like, they're developing players, but they're not, because their star and their core is kind of already in there and developed. They've kind of already proven themselves. They don't need the chance to keep proving themselves. I think a Pinto and like a Greg too, I'm not overly worried about them, because you don't really expect them to become these 90-point players. They just need to do well in their role in a middle six capacity, right? So I'm not too worried about that. My only thing with Gallant is that, like, I'm looking at his pedigree, and he hasn't actually won a whole lot. I mean, he's been to the playoffs in 5 of his 8 seasons, I guess. No, sorry, 5 of his 11 seasons. And he's only made it past the first round twice. And in those seasons, he had like a really strong netminder as well. And he had Fleury in Vegas, who had a Vezina year, and he had a couple other really good netminders as well. But Shesterkin too, sorry. But yeah, I don't know. He hasn't really proven a whole lot on that front, I guess. Yet he does have this high pedigree that people seem to talk about, where he's like one of the better coaches in the league. So I don't know. I'm a little confused on that, just because he hasn't actually won much in his career. I guess he's been a good regular season coach is the big thing. And Ottawa, again, like you said, even if it's for 2 years, if they make the playoffs in both years that he's there, and then they're like, okay, we're not doing well enough, 2 first-round exits or something, maybe you fire him. But I mean, you got to get to the playoffs first, and it does seem like he's a guy who could get them there.
Yeah, I'm gonna talk about the Oilers again. And I talk about them too much, I think, on the show, but they're fun to watch and everything. And I'm gonna mention Jay Woodcroft, the Oilers head coach. He's been there for I guess 2 years now. I was listening to his post game last night, and he was just talking about, he was asked about how, how does your team respond? And for whoever who's not aware, like the Oilers struggled mightily in game one and then came out guns a blazing game two. And I kind of just run of the mill stuff, but he was just talking about, we use the 82 game schedule, the full, like he was emphasizing how hard the whole year is. He said we use those 82 games to prepare us for this time of year. And I think a philosophy like that is something that the Sens need. And so I just bring that up because when you mention, Gallant having good regular season success and not necessarily playoff, I could see that as a red flag. I completely agree. But at the same time, it's a grind to get there. And this year more than any, it's just get in and figure it out then, right? And I would doubt that if DJ came in next year, I don't know if he would be coming into game one and training camp of next season being like, we're preparing for game 83. We're preparing for that time of year, right? It's a different philosophy. And as much as DJ wants to say, yeah, I'm ready for the challenge and everything, I like DJ too. I think he's a good coach. I think he'll find, success elsewhere. But I think it's just more about a fresh voice with this core, right? Like, I don't think I think people might underestimate the power of that. Just a different voice, literally. It doesn't have to change a ton. What it can do for a group come playoff time, right? And like I said, we're going to be holding them to a playoff standard. So I just brought out that Woodcroft thing because I think it's an interesting outlook on things, right? You're a team with the two best players in the world, and you're like, we're using the 82 games to prepare us to bounce back when we have a bad playoff game. Like I love that. I love that quote from him.
Yeah, that is a really good quote and a good comparison. Yeah, I mean Gallant, like I said, I think he's proven himself in the regular season, and that is what the Sens need right now. I mean, they haven't been good enough in the regular season, and they've faced a lot of kind of self-inflicted barriers, and I think a new voice is essential. And whether that's him or a different coach, to me it's essential. It needs to happen. On him specifically, yeah, I'm not even gonna worry about the playoffs right now. Once we get there, that's when you kind of shift the focus into okay, making the playoffs and then succeeding in the playoffs. And it's almost the same with Brandstrom, how people are talking about get rid of Brandstrom, he'll never succeed in the playoffs. Well, the thing is, they haven't made the playoffs in 6 years and what feels like 40 years. Like, it's just been so long, and you need good players to make it there, and you need a good coach to make it there. Now, if a player struggles in the playoffs, maybe you get rid of him. If a coach struggles in the playoffs, maybe you get rid of him. But people are looking too far ahead, I think. And you don't need your next coach. Ideally, yeah, you'd want him to be there for many years and be this like John Cooper, iconic guy for Tampa, but you don't necessarily need that. I think the goal with the next coach is to push this team to the next level and into the playoffs. And then from there, we can kind of reconsider and reevaluate our needs.
And that's why I think Gallant is perfect. Like, I think that's why getting them there for 2 seasons or whatever it is going to be huge for building the program. And like I said, once you get there, anything can happen. I'm going to mention another coach that I think gets a lot of flack, and I'm going to go with Paul Maurice in Florida. Look, I think he had some struggles in Winnipeg recently anyway. Not a ton of playoff success up there, but look what he's done in Florida. Like, he completely outcoached Jim Montgomery in Boston. He's doing it again with Toronto. And of course, I say this again every episode, but by the time people are listening to this, the Leafs will hopefully be down 3-0 to the Florida Panthers. But like, Paul Maurice is a playoff type coach. And I think there's different, like, you can analyze all this different stuff, but right now the Sens need to get into the playoffs. And I think a guy like Gallant will do that. Now, heavy price tag, probably. Who knows if he even wants to step in next season, but we'll get into all that. It's just another name that's out there on the market that makes things interesting with ownership hopefully wrapping up here in the next week or 2 weeks. I guess I'm hoping. But yeah, like, would you? I don't know if he's coming in and immediately like Pinto isn't having a great start to the year. Like that's another discussion for another time, I guess. But I don't know if we'd be guns a-blazing at Gallant. Like, you got to give him time, right? It can't just be 2 games and we're like, this guy is not a good coach.
Yeah, for sure. And with Pinto struggling, I mean, it depends how he's being used, right? And I do the same with DJs. If a guy is struggling, it depends on their usage and kind of the situation they're in, because I think Pinto set the bar pretty high for himself this year. I almost think we can expect a bit of regression just because he's not going to be playing with the same players or in the same role. Like if he doesn't score 20 goals next year, that's not a fail in my mind, right? It's a different role, right? He's going to be focused on more defensive situations, I think, overall. But I wouldn't blame Gallant, no. Now, if it's the whole season and he's subjecting Pinto to a role that's just ridiculous and he's not like, I don't even know what example would be of that in a third line situation, but if he moves Pinto to like the fourth line or something and he's just for some reason doesn't like the guy, then yeah, I'm gonna be angry at Gallant. But I don't know. With DJ, I've been pretty angry at him at times for his usage of players, and I mean for good reason. Good lord, we could talk about that all day. But with Gallant, yeah, I mean I think that it comes down to the expectation, and in my mind, say we advance 3 years from now and Gallant gets fired for whatever reason, if they make the playoffs next year, to me, then the hiring, it's a good hiring. Like it makes sense that that's a good hiring. I mean, if they make the playoffs and they take the jump, and the jump is what we keep referencing because that's what it comes down to. If they make the jump, then I'd say whoever was hired as their coach this summer, and even if it's DJ, I'd say it's successful. You've done your job and you've accomplished what we expected, right? That's all it comes down to. And if they miss the playoffs, I wouldn't be surprised if whoever the new coach is gets fired after 1 year if they do hire somebody, because like new ownership's going to be firm on that.
Yeah, and you know, just the last thing on the coaching stuff is like you mentioned, it would be a success if they make the playoffs and then down the line they fire him. Like that was what he's brought in for. With DJ, I think he's been a successful hiring too to this point. But I think if you extend it any further, it risks not being a good hiring. And quickly, also on Gallant, I'm pretty sure that third line in New York was Kako, Lafreniere, and Hedel, and they're all young guys, right? So it's not to say that he doesn't play young guys. It's just that he doesn't develop them properly. And New York was different circumstances because you had Kreider and Panarin ahead of Lafreniere. Like who's he going to play ahead of, right? And it's different in Ottawa. It's different. I mentioned that because I think the third line in Ottawa next year could very well be a Pinto, Greg, Sokolov mix, right? With some of those three guys. So we'll wrap up with that one for episode 5 there, Brennan. That was a lot of good stuff, and I'm trying to keep my fingers crossed that more Sens news will keep coming, and but we will also be able to find stuff to talk about because there's never an off day as an Ottawa Senators fan. So thank you everyone for tuning in. Please like, comment, and subscribe on the YouTube page and share with friends and everything. And go subscribe to everydaysens.com for extra incentives with members pods and some free articles and some insight on in-depth insight of what we just talked about, essentially. I mean, Brennan mentioned he's going to be writing about Smejkal. Luckily, he gets to write it instead of say it out loud. So we will see you guys next later in the week, and thank you for tuning in.